How's everybody doing? That was actually more response than I was expecting. You seem a little quiet today. Are you sure you're ready for this sermon? Okay, I have to admit something to you. Often when I write a sermon, the introduction is the most difficult part for me to write. That's not because of writer's block and trouble getting started. It's not a problem. It's not something silly like that. See, the introduction of a sermon is supposed to grab your attention and get you to listen. But usually what I want to say in the introduction, when I write it down and then read it back, seems kind of over the line. Little too pushy, a little too edgy, maybe sometimes inappropriate. And then I have to go back and find a nicer way to introduce the sermon. And that makes it difficult. So usually you almost always hear the second version of the introduction to my sermons. But today, the text that Michael read to you is kind of pushy anyway. So I say let's go to it right from the start. Okay? So here we go. Can I be toxic for a minute? Okay? Or at least what our society calls toxic. Are there any of you who consider yourselves or now or used to be athletes? Anyone who likes to play or used to like to play a sport? Okay, let me ask all of you, but especially those who are sporty, a controversial question in our world today. Okay, this is it. What is the purpose of sports? What is the goal of a sport? Thank you. That is the correct answer. To win. The goal is to win. Now, I understand that this is politically incorrect now and probably considered toxic masculinity, but the point of sports is to win. We used to know this, but even now, according to the National Institute of Health, sports is defined as exercise or physical activity with a purpose to overcome adversities and win. The former head coach of the New York Jets football team famously said this.
This is what's great about sports. This is what the greatest thing about sports is. You play to win the game. Hello? You play to win the game. You don't play to just play it. That's the great thing about sports. You play to win. And I don't care if you don't have any wins. You go play to win. When you start telling me it doesn't matter, then retire. Get out. Because it matters.
So you play to win the game. We used to know this. In the movie War Games, when they asked the out-of-control computer, what's the primary objective of the game? The computer says, to win the game. But in our world of participation trophies and not getting our feelings hurt, we have forgotten that the goal is to win. And that has led to the state of Christianity we see today. And you might be surprised to know that the Apostle Paul wrote about this in his letter to the in his first letter to the Corinthian church. So let's take a look at that, because it continues right from what we saw last week. And you'll remember that Paul expanded on the lesson last week that we are to build each other up in love and put up with anything rather than hinder the gospel. Now, it may sound strange to you to have the point of sports is to win next to we should build each other up in love, but we'll get there. Applying the lesson to himself, he told his readers that he had the right as an apostle to be paid by the church, that the church ought to pay the preacher. But he said he didn't use that right because he didn't want to hinder those who hated him from hearing the gospel. And in this week's text, he continues. In verse 15, he says, "But I have not used any of these rights. I'm not writing this in hope that you will do such things for me." So he wants to be clear. He is not writing them in hopes that they will provide for. He's not hinting at them, hey guys, you ought to. I'm not telling you to, but you ought. He's not hinting at that. He does not want them to start paying him. He says, I would rather die than have anyone deprive me of this boast. So this is serious. He says he would rather die than have them take away his ability to brag about preaching without charge. But, look at the next verse. He says, yet When I preach, I can't boast, for I am compelled to preach. Woe to me if I do not preach the gospel. He says he wants to boast, but he can't because he's not doing anything voluntarily. He's not doing this because he wants to. He preaches because he can't do anything else. He is forced by God to preach the gospel. So he can't brag about how good he is because he does it without pay, because he's not doing it of his own free will. He says in verse 17, if I preach voluntarily, I have a reward. If not voluntarily, I am simply discharging a trust committed to me. What then is my reward? Just this, that in preaching the gospel, I may offer it free of charge, and so not use my right in preaching it. Paul is not preaching for the pay. He's not gotten into working for the church by choice. It wasn't his dream job when he was little. God has forced him. This is, by the way, how you can tell an honest and honorable preacher apart from those you should stay away from. Good preachers don't have a choice. Good preachers aren't in it for the pay or the recognition or how big their office is. Good preachers have been given a trust, an obligation from God, and they have to discharge it, or else it will eat them away from the inside out. Now, see, I told you the sermon was going to get touchy. But what you need to understand is that when you go out the world and you hear people talk on God's behalf, there are some preachers who are not in it for the correct reasons. Some think that being a preacher is an easy way to make money. And they put on a good show, and they'll usually tell you what you want to hear to make the money. Others of them want recognition and prestige, and being a preacher lets them feel important because people come and listen to them. None of them really care primarily about the Word of God or what is supposed to be our primary goal as Christians in our life, which we're going to come to in a minute in this passage. And then there's other preachers who preach because God won't let them do anything else. And those are the guys you want to listen to. The ones who have the finger of God on the back of their neck, forcing them to discharge the trust that he gave them. The ones who can't do anything else, because like Jeremiah said, if they decided not to mention God's word or speak about him anymore, his word would be like a fire in their heart. Fire shut up in their bones and they can't hold it in. Those are the good preachers. Those are preachers like the Apostle Paul. And at the risk of speaking like the Apostle Paul, you get to see this here at Cornerstone. There are 3 of us at least who can't keep our mouths shut. No matter how hard we try, and it's not because we're loudmouths, although some of us are. It's because there's fire in our bones that we can't keep inside. And if you sit there and try, you burn up. And I know there's those who complain about this, but you see this from Dr. J. It's funny to watch him in a Sunday school class that he's not teaching. Because if you're the teacher, you can see when the fire of God starts burning in his bones, because he starts trying to hold himself down, and then his finger starts coming up. That's the sign of a preacher who has a real call from God. Fire in his bones. Those are the kind of preachers you want to listen to. Okay, but now I have to flip this on you, because if you remember way back to our study of the book of Romans, in chapter 10, there was this message about how God is holding out his hand to reach disobedient and obstinate people talking about the world, and that he does that through each of us. And the message of Romans chapter 10 that week was that we are all called to be preachers. So we are all compelled by God to spread the gospel, like the Apostle Paul says, and we should not neglect this duty. And if we do, it ought to be like fire burning inside of you trying to get out. Then the Apostle Paul tells his readers about how to go about this. and what the goal is. He says in verse 19, though I am free and belong to no man, I make myself a slave to everyone to win as many as possible. The goal is to win as many as possible. The goal is to win as many as possible. So he says he makes himself a slave to everyone. Now, what does he mean by that? Well, fortunately for all of us, he explains it. He says in verse 20, to the Jews I became like a Jew to win the Jews. To those under the law I became like one under the law, though I myself am not under the law, so as to win those under the law. To those not having the law I became like one not having the law, though I am not free from God's law, but I'm under Christ's law, so as to win those not having the law. To the weak I became weak to win the weak. I have become all things to all men, so that by all possible means I might save some. I do all this for the sake of the gospel, that I may share in its blessing. And as we read these verses, we have to understand that we live in a world that is fixated on identity. And when Paul talks here about becoming like all these different groups of people that he mentions to win them, he is not saying that his identity is fluid or condoning and practicing what they practice. What he's saying here is that he lives his life understanding the goal, that by all means possible, he might save some. And Paul realizes that in every situation he's in life, he is a preacher. He is compelled by God in that situation like we all are. And he's saying that when he talks with others, he does not stubbornly insist on being the way he is, and that everybody else has to accommodate to him. No, in fact, he is saying the opposite. He evaluates the other person that he is preaching to, and he tailors the method of delivery so as to be best heard by whichever audience he is speaking to. Because the goal is not about himself, is not about his rights, it's not about getting paid. The goal is to win as many as possible. The same should be true for us. We should realize that in every situation in life, we are there as God's representative, as if he were making his appeal to that person through us. And we should always have the goal in mind: to win as many as possible. So therefore, we should speak to each group, each person we speak to, in the most effective way possible, remembering that it's not about me. The goal is to win them. You play to win the game. And just like I did, Paul compares his life, his readers' lives, our lives, to the lives of athletes. He says in verse 24, don't you know that in a race all the runners run, but only one gets the prize? Run in such a way as to get the prize. Okay, here is the toxic masculinity. Or if we wanted to put a more accurate term on it, here is the truth. The truth is, in a race, in the Olympics, whatever race it is, everybody runs, but only one of them wins. You don't like that? Tough. There's only one winner. That's reality. He says everybody who competes in the games goes into strict training. So all the athletes go into strict training. You have to do that if you want to win, if you want to achieve the goal. They do it to get a crown that will not last, but we do it to get a crown that will last forever. So if athletes are willing to subject themselves to such strict training for a temporary prize, then we who are striving for an everlasting crown should train all the more. He says in verse 26, therefore, I do not run aimlessly. I don't run like a man running aimlessly. I don't fight like a man beating the air. What he says is, I'm not just a participant. I'm not in this to get the thanks for showing up award. We shouldn't be either. He says, no, I beat my body and make it my slave so that after I have preached to others, I myself will not be disqualified for the prize. So he says he disciplines himself in every way with his eyes focused on the goal so that he won't be disqualified from the prize. He lives his life so as not to be disqualified from the prize. What is the prize? What is the prize that Paul does not want to be disqualified from? Eternal life for himself? Wrong. That's not the win that Paul has been talking about here. That's not the goal that he's been telling his readers that he's pushing towards. Remember, the goal is to win as many as possible. So Paul disciplines himself so that he can achieve that goal, which is to win as many as possible. If he doesn't discipline himself, if he doesn't train himself, he may be disqualified, unqualified for achieving the goal, winning others. This is not about eternal life for himself, because it's not about him at all. The goal is to win them. And Paul's implication here is that his readers, so therefore us, should live as he does. The standard he presents is not just for him, but for all believers. So he says, run in such a way as to get the prize. Train yourself and discipline yourself so that you will win. How should you live? To win. You play to win the game. Hello? And the goal, the win, is to win as many as possible. We don't live just to participate. Paul says, live in such a way as to win. And this is where we come to the problem. Because we have way too many Christian losers, or at least Christian participants. We're actually at the point in our world where we've made participating good enough. It's not. That's a lie. But in fairness, we do this everywhere. We live in a world where we've made winning bad. Winning is oppressive. Losing is admirable. And participating is really all we can possibly do, because we wouldn't want to win and make other people feel bad. And training? Forget training. I should get a trophy just for being here. We hate training. We hate training today. We'll goof around. We'll pretend to train. We'll take a picture of ourselves, buy some weights maybe that way, just, to get some likes on social media. But real disciplined training, not a chance. Let me give an example here that's going to make everyone angry. Let me use the epidemic of obesity in our culture as an example. I'm sorry if this hits too close to home, but you need to hear it. Would you like to know, I could make a YouTube video about this with this headline and get thousands of views. Would you like to know the secret to losing weight? The secret to losing weight. Are you ready for it? Expend more calories than you take in. That's it. That is the secret to losing weight. So why do we have such an epidemic of obesity? Because we can't even discipline ourselves that much. Is it just unbelievers who are undisciplined? If only. And that's just one simple aspect of physical fitness, let alone spiritual fitness or emotional fitness or interpersonal fitness. Paul says, think about the life of an athlete training to compete in the Olympics. Your life should be as serious and as disciplined as theirs is. In fact, more so because you're striving for an eternal prize. Your spiritual training, your emotional training, your interpersonal training, even your physical training should be that laser focused on the goal to win as many as possible. We have to train ourselves to achieve the goal. Training requires putting yourself out, inconveniencing yourself. At times, it will be difficult, and you will be uncomfortable. It will require stretching and challenging yourself, and at times saying no to yourself, your desires, your preferences, your rights. But let me remind you, it's not about you. The goal is to win them. So we have to train ourselves to do whatever is necessary so that by all means possible, we might win as many as possible. At times, that will mean giving up some of your rights, or what you're owed, or what you want to do to train and run the race. This is what the Apostle Paul is talking about. It will require making our bodies and our minds and our emotions and our attitudes our slave rather than being controlled by them and our greedy whims, so that in all we say and think and feel and do, we are ready and available to preach the gospel to every them in word and in deed. To give a couple specifics, going back to last week. You know those people you don't like or you think are unacceptable, who aren't really who they say or don't like you back or all that? You have to love them and help them. Don't like that? It's not about you. Seriously. We got to stop this about me stuff. It is not about, get over yourself. Let me tell you this. This is something else some people won't like. If you don't like someone else, if you can't love someone else the way God does, if you can't forgive them, are you ready? If you're holding something against them, you are the problem, not them. So stop it. Run the race to win. You think serving God is too risky or too dangerous? I have to tell you the truth. I get so tired of hearing Christians say how we can't do this or we shouldn't do that because that's too dangerous or we can't serve God that way. Goodness, some people have said that we shouldn't go prayer walking in the community because it's too dangerous. What an expression of Christian participancy that is, instead of running the race to win. Maybe we could get a faith maybe the size of a mustard seed there. Come on, let's trust God a tiny bit, okay? Let's at least try to win. Things at church not going as you'd like? Do you disagree with the direction? Is the preacher maybe a little too pushy? Is the music maybe a little too loud? Is the service too long? Are the lessons a little too political? Remember, the goal is not about you. The goal is to win them. Maybe you should focus less on yourself and your rights and your desires and what you want and a little more on others. Don't have enough time? Too many other things competing for your attention? Too many responsibilities so you can't reliably serve God? Take a step back and think about that one. Which of the responsibilities leads to a crown that is temporary? And which leads to one that lasts? Life is not about you. The goal is to win as many as possible. Live to win in the right things. Are you worried about your skill level? I'm not good at talking to others. I don't know what to say. Guess what? Train. Pay attention to the person you're talking to. Remember, the goal is to win them and trust God. Am I making you feel ashamed about your effort level you put in for God? I actually hope so a little bit. Because as shocking as this may sound, shame can be a powerful motivator for good. And it's one we've lost in our world. You know what else is a powerful motivator? Winning and losing. Paul says we ought to live our lives for God as to win. Is if we're going to win. If you can't give him that devotion, if you can't try to win for God, what are you doing? Think about the level of sacrifice that Christ gave for you. What are you doing in comparison? If you've ever seen the painting on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, you know that Michelangelo accurately reflected our effort level for God in that painting. There's one section of the painting called The Creation of Adam. It should be on the screen here behind me. I have always disliked this painting because it is an accurate representation of the effort level for God from humans. In the picture, in the painting, God is shown diving out of heaven to touch the finger of Adam, who lazily reclines there as if to say, whatever, God. Michelangelo got it right. This is usually our attitude when it comes to God. What's wrong with us? In light of who God is, in light of what he's done for us, in light of his command, his glory and his love, shouldn't we devote our entire existence to serving him? Look at Adam. Look at us. Making it all about us. No. The goal of existence is to bring God glory and to win as many as possible. Let's not let this be the reality of our lives. An athlete competing in the Olympics goes into strict training to achieve the goal. They devote their existence to that pursuit. What they eat, how they spend their time, how they train their bodies, what coaches they surround themselves with and give their time to. Their attention is and their devotion is laser focused on that singular prize. Their entire life is primarily about that. It takes precedent over all other things. They beat their bodies to train them to be good enough to win. They put themselves out to win the prize. They do that for a goal that is utterly pointless. We aim for a goal that is of utmost importance. In fact, there is nothing more important than our goal. We live to bring God glory and to win as many as possible to him. That's the win. That's the goal. Nothing matters more. Shouldn't our training and our focus and our effort to run the race be reflective of how much more important our goal is than an athlete's? You see, all the runners run, but only one gets the prize. Run, live your life in such a way as to get the prize. You play to win the game. Our goal, our win, is to win as many as possible. So live to win.